Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first Idaho Business Now webinar. I'm Kim Burgess. I'm the editor of the Idaho Business Review. Throughout 2020, we will be offering these weekly webinars to help your business recover during these unprecedented times. Today, our topic is vacations, flexible hours, and working from home. Joining us are T.M. Rastegar, Executive Director at Trailhead, the downtown Boise co-working space, and Amy Lombardo, attorney at Parsons, Beal, and Latimer. Thank you both for joining us today. So our format today is each panelist will basically have the floor for a 10-minute block to address our topic today. So we are going to start out with T.M. So T.M., over to you.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate you having me on the program today, the very first inaugural IBR session here. I'll be talking to the topic of remote working today, and I will give you and the audience the Trailhead perspective as far as remote working goes here in Boise. And so just briefly about myself, thank you for the intro. I'm the Executive Director at Trailhead. I've been there for about 2 years now. I've lived in Boise for about 20 years. I'm working at various startups and tech companies here in the Valley. And remote working is really a topic that is important to me as a person, but also to Trailhead as an organization. It could have a tremendous amount of impact on our ecosystem here in Boise. And throughout my presentation, I will cover the why, how, and what around that. So for that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen now and pull up a few slides. Okay, it's making me authorize your account. So just bear with me for 1 minute. I think it should be working now. Can you see my screen?
We can.
All right. So with that brief introduction, let me just tell you briefly about what I will cover today. I will give you a brief overview of the organization that I lead called Trailhead. I will share a few selected remote working trends and their implications as far as Trailhead and the local ecosystem goes. And then lastly, I will end by highlighting some selected drawbacks and risks as the rise of remote working is taking place here in the Treasure Valley. So briefly about Trailhead, as Kim has already alluded to, we are a startup incubator and co-working space. We are a Boise-based nonprofit organization with 2 locations in downtown. Our mission is to accelerate the creation and growth of the startup ecosystem. And we do that by providing collaborative workspaces, amongst others, to remote workers. We also provide educational programming and experiential learning opportunities. We pair founders and startup folks with mentors. And lastly, we're very active in the ecosystem building arena. And so we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary in May. And since our inception, over the last 5 years, we've served over 400 startups and founders. And last year in particular, we, through our members, helped create 65 full-time jobs. Our members generated revenue in total of $22 million. They also raised capital in the neighborhood of $22 million. And those are the numbers for 2019. You may know Trailhead through one of our events such as Boise Startup Week or Trail Mix, both of which, by the way, will be fully digital and be broadcasted remotely this year, the week of October 26th. A glimpse of our membership will highlight the importance of remote workers to Trailhead. So a quarter of our members consider themselves remote workers or contractors. And that percentage as a co-working space or also called an entrepreneurial support center, around the country, we find that we are right on average. So around the country, 25% of members of co-working spaces are typically remote workers. So these are people whose employers are based in other cities and they work remotely for them out of a co-working space. So just to say that we're right on national average there. The trends that we currently see really have to be taken into context of remote working as it's been unfolding over time. And so it's a hot topic now because of the pandemic. Remote working has been forced onto certain organizations and people and employees. But acknowledging that this has been a trend that's been in the making for quite some time and now has just been accelerated sort of shifts our view of remote working as I'm going to cover it. And so changing the way we work and changing where we work potentially has significant implications for all of the stakeholders involved. And by stakeholders, I mean employees, employers, the communities and municipalities that they work in or are based out of, as well as commercial and residential real estate prices, and many other factors that are impacted by the rise of remote working. However, I would also add that we are, in the context of the pandemic, we are in the early stages of the accelerated shift to remote work. And I believe that most are still waiting to see how this pandemic is going to unfold as they make decisions with respect to increasing or decreasing their remote workforce. So with that, considering this current rise really as a temporary solution really brings opportunities to consider this, this being remote workforce as a permanent solution. So from from our point of view, remote working can be a very positive thing for the Boise ecosystem. Attracting remote workers is a good thing. It adds to our local talent pool, which in turn can fuel the growth of existing startups and businesses, and at the same time attract more employers to Boise. Because if you think about it, when there is a large concentration of talent and access to talent, employers will take notice and they tend to flock to those areas where talent is concentrated. And given Boise's pedigree, a relatively low cost of living, a high quality of life, and we're relatively not very densely populated, we can really position ourselves to benefit from remote workers coming to Boise and working from here for companies that are not based here. In turn, ultimately attracting those same companies that are not based here to consider Boise as a place to do business. And so if you were to take an example, a Bay Area engineer who currently works for a given tech firm in the Bay Area could relocate to Boise, but that person would also currently take a pay cut because pay is typically, for remote workers, pay is typically adjusted to the market that you work in. And so with that, since 2005, there's been just an explosion of the number of people who work from home, largely fueled by technology and infrastructure that supports the ability to work from home. And so some of these stats, I also listed the sources, really point to, for those of us who are just now taking notice of remote working because it was forced on us, it's been out there. There are resources, there are best practices. And so while it may be new to you, there are plenty of resources locally here in the ecosystem and nationwide who can help you with an implementation of a remote workforce. And so while I'm talking about remote working as a potential benefit to both Trailhead and the ecosystem that we work in, and we work so hard to build, there's also another side of that coin that I wouldn't want anyone, especially your audience here, to lose sight of. And what I'm talking about here is potential side effects. So if you think about your workforce being decentralized, in other words, not being located in the same building or location, you'll find that personal relationships between employees and managers and supervisors are much harder to build. And therefore, the overall culture could suffer at your organization. So if you're an organization who deeply cares about culture, who may even leverage their culture as a differentiator to their competition, you want to think very carefully about what a remote workforce would do to the culture and just in advance preemptively manage that. Secondly, this is an obvious one, the flow of communication and collaboration is going to suffer with remote workforces. So gaps appear when people aren't co-located in the same building or area. Now, that could then result in a company's ability to innovate also suffering from that, because creativity and innovation are closely tied to the people that work in the organization, and their ability to communicate and collaborate is a direct correlation to the organization's ability to be creative and innovate. And so those two are very much micro level side effects or drawbacks if you think about, intra-organization. But there is an underlying and systemic risk that I also want to highlight, and that is the potential rise in inequality that could result from the proliferation of a remote workforce. If you think that through, and when we talk about remote work, we really have to take into account that not everyone can work from home. In fact, the higher the income earner, the more likely the person can be able to perform work from their home. That means, professionals in finance, product development, human resources, IT, and marketing are more likely to move their work to their homes or remotely, which would then leave low-wage workers behind. And it's not just socioeconomic inequality that a rising remote workforce brings along with it. There's also some racial inequalities that I want to point out here. So the technology and education gap in the United States has widened over the last few years. When on-the-job training and broadband internet are not available to employees, certain folks will not be able to meet a company's requirement to perform the work. And so statistically, the Washington Post recently revealed that 37% of Asian Americans and 30% of whites said they could work remotely from home because they have the infrastructure and resources to do so. But on the flip side, only 20% of African Americans and 16% of Hispanics that were questioned said that they had the ability to work from home. So that is a significant infrastructure and educational gap that then would lead to potential rise in inequality. So in summary, what I covered today is that remote working is not a new phenomenon. It's new to some of us, and it certainly is receiving more attention as a topic now because of the pandemic. Secondly, remote workers can be a positive influence on the ecosystem here in Boise, and that's very much Trailhead's approach to fostering and curating remote workers and attracting them to come to the Treasure Valley. Lastly, I highlighted some risks. The risks and drawback that I mentioned are not reasons to forego a remote workforce or to not implement a remote workforce. They're rather reasons to take a more holistic approach to the remote workforce and manage those drawbacks and risks as they arise. And with that, that's the end of my presentation and the topics that I was going to share today.
Thank you so much, TM. And now we are going to hear from Amy Lombardo. So Amy, you have the stage.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
I can hear you.
Let me just try and
I can see your screen.
okay. And my notes. Okay, thanks very much. My name's Amy Lombardo. I am a partner at Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, and I'm a litigator, but I also advise employers on some of the new employment laws whenever they are passed. And since March, I've also been serving on my firm's COVID-19 response team. So we've had an interdisciplinary group of people from employment law, bankruptcy, litigation, corporate, kind of getting together once a week and talking about the issues that we've seen. So I've given a lot of webinars, and I've also worked exclusively from my home since March. So I can't tell you a lot about Netflix, but here's my legal disclaimer, which says, I'm a lawyer, but today I am not your lawyer in this moment. Each of the topics that we were given to talk about could essentially be a whole webinar, and I could say a lot on them. I also have a lot of slides with a lot of words that I am going to try to not say. My default is to lecture and instruct, so I am going to try to not give so many instructions, and feel free to email me. I'll give my email at the end, and I'll send you a copy of the slides. So we started back on March 13th with Idaho's first confirmed case. We had just over 30 days of a stay-at-home order that instructed at least those who could work remotely to work remotely. And then the each of the plans, including the White House's opening up plan and Idaho's reopening plan, almost no matter what phase we're in, they all encourage telework when it works. And then I looked at today's CDC guidance. Telework is important today because we're focusing now on social distancing, and obviously telework is the best way to socially distance from one another. If you're working from home, you're not going to come into contact with all of your employers or employees. And it's one of the options for how to protect your high-risk employees as well. So as Tia mentioned, the work from home is different during a pandemic than it is regularly. So he's right. People have been working from home since before all of this occurred. And I just think it's helpful for people to remember as they are going forward and kind of assessing these issues that there's a lot of other things in people's lives going on right now. Yes, it all is sort of COVID related, but if you're thinking about working from home, just remember that pandemic productivity is not going to be the same as work from home productivity. So if you are someone who has kids at home and you are trying to also homeschool them for a few months, like I did, or if you're sharing Wi-Fi with other family members, if you have a family member who's a first responder, or if you're someone who's been exposed and you're waiting test results, or if you are sick, those are all reasons why your employees may be a little more distracted than normal. So just look at the whole picture if you are looking at this as a permanent solution. To talk about flex time for a second, it basically just means flexible arrangements between the employer and employee. So it could be staggered shifts, but that's more like something that the employer sort of institutes. It's more like usually adjusted start and end time to your day. And it's usually more employee driven. Often the employee needs to get approval in advance for a specific schedule. And as Tia mentioned, communication is really key for this to work. So maybe you want to set up core office hours, and you definitely want to continue to track hours and pay your overtime. But if you can talk to your employees or your team members or whoever you're working with on a project more often, then the flex time works better. The more important thing about flex time to remember is every survey that is almost ever done has shown that flex time is something employees want. It gives employees in normal times a lot more control over their schedule, and that autonomy is important to employees. And even more so now, when the pandemic hit, now, as we've talked about, all your employees are doing more things under stressful conditions, probably. So everyone has new demands placed upon them. Everyone is sort of trying to, figure out if Staples has enough toner or printer paper, and also where they can order dinner from and what they have to wear or what are the hours or the rules. So there's a lot of other things going on, and these days, if you don't have a flexible schedule, it seems almost impossible to get things done. So often people with kids at home are sort of switching. They'll do part-time morning or part-time evening. Sometimes I find that now 11 p.m. is a great time to get responses to emails. I hope that doesn't continue, but that's where we are now. So this is a list of everything I could talk about, lots of the questions that we've been getting. And just an issue I wanted to talk about is on vacation. If you are big enough to have an HR department or multiple employees, HR has started to worry about employees all coming back to work at the same time. And because no one was allowed to really go on vacation in the spring, and maybe all of your travel is restricted in the summer, there are employees who, HR is sort of beginning to wonder if everyone's going to come back at the same time and ask to take off the same weeks. So if you have a workforce where you need to stagger people and look at what your current policy says, a lot of companies are also trying to hold on to maybe cash reserves. So until things get a little more stable. So you may not want all of your employees to just be building up their paid leave and then have them switch jobs, or if you have a layoff and you need to pay them for that leave, you may want to think about those issues and if your current policy represents kind of what you want to have going forward. This is sort of the same, just things to think about when you're thinking about changing what sort of policy you want. And then the important thing to remember is that certainly your workforce is now going to expect some flex time, and continue to go forward. They may expect flex time and being able to work from home, because we've seen that when you have to make it work, often it does work. So lots of employees are expecting people to be more flexible. And although I don't think, as I said, hopefully 11 p.m. won't be the best time to email in the future, so there'll be some flex time, but perhaps not as much as we're seeing today. I always tell employers that it's an opportunity that they have whenever they're writing their policies to renew their culture and values, and sort of live that through their policies. So it is an opportunity for employers now to kind of look at how your employees think they're being treated, how your policies are going. And it's absolutely true, especially because now mental health issues are on the rise. Communication and, in addition, compassion for your employees and understanding have never been more important. I wanted to just say one more thing about what TM had said, which is I'm happy that he noted that there could be issues in disparity with racial issues or income issues. It also, on the, I guess, the flip side, I have found just personally that it's sometimes for people who are smaller or quieter, it's actually really nice to be on a Zoom call and have everyone's box be the same size and to not be sort of shouting in an office to be heard. The microphone will always, you know, pick you up. So sometimes I think it's can also be it can be more of an equality thing. But I recognize there are issues on both sides. So that is all I have. And thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thank you, TM and Amy, to you both for this interesting information today. I hope the members of our audience came away with some ideas or topics that they might want to explore further. And I found it just very interesting personally. So thank you again for your time. We will be picking up next week with a breakfast series webinar. Those are structured a little bit differently from these. They're an hour long, and they will be at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, July 14th. The topic is Idaho's food culture, and we have 5 awesome speakers discussing that in a Q&A format. They are Colette DePhelps, Board Advisor for Fair Idaho, Carrie Ann Fallow, CEO of Dairy West, Laura Johnson with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, Dave Crick, founding partner of Bitter Creek Ale House, Diablo and Sons, and Red Feather Lounge. And last but not least, Kate Stoddard from Orchestra Provisions, who was also a Trail Mix winner, so a tie back into Trailhead and TM. So please join us for that on July 14th, and then we're picking back up with these shorter webinars on Thursdays, starting with July 23rd, Keeping Urban Idaho Green, where we'll learn about what it takes for cities and businesses to keep trees and landscapes cared for. So I hope you guys will tune in for that. Thank you.